Evening light pooled across the kitchen tiles, warm and ordinary, while Margaret folded a dish towel and watched Olivia set two identical glasses of lemon water on a tray faint bubbles. One neat slice of citrus perched on each rim as if symmetry could promise safety. Then Olivia paused, slipped a small packet from her cardigan, and tipped a pinch into one glass so quietly it felt like a secret learning how to breathe, stirred once, tucked the packet away, and carried the tray to the table where Ethan drifted in with a grin, praising dinner like any easy night. The clink of glass on wood masked the moment. Margaret leaned in as though admiring the lemon and, with the softest nudge, traded the positions of the two glasses, time hiccuping and then pretending it hadn't. "Here," Olivia said, sliding one toward Margaret and keeping the other, and conversation rushed in Ethan's client story, Olivia's teasing reply, cutlery chiming while Margaret lifted her drink, paused at the rim and caught a scent that wasn't just lemon, a thin bitter note like orange peel after the sugar is gone. Olivia took a small sip from hers, blinked against the sharpness, then let a calm little smile return, a bit tangy, and reached for vegetables. And Ethan, noticing, asked if she was okay, earning a steady fine as if the taste were nothing at all. Still, Margaret set her glass down, the coaster printing a damp crescent that looked too much like a question mark, and she floated through the motions passing bread, nodding at jokes while tracking the subtler things, how Olivia braced a hand on the chair to stand, how a tissue touched to her mouth left the faintest orange stain, how a moment of stillness hung in her shoulders as if she were hearing music no one else could. The oven timer chirped and Olivia rose with the tray, pausing half a heartbeat, steadying herself on the counter with a breath that said, "I'm fine," even before the words did. And Ethan reached to take the weight from her palms. Then a phone buzzed and the screen blinked Harris Clinic on and off like a lighthouse no one had asked for. And Margaret felt something old inside her turn over, instinct folding into memory, memory into motive, until Ethan noticed his mother's untouched drink and said gently, "You're not drinking," and Margaret, meeting his eyes, answered, "I will," meaning it in ways she wasn't ready to explain, studying the lemon seed floating near the rim like the dot that completes a question, while Olivia sat very straight across from her with that careful smile people wear when there's more on their minds than they're ready to say, the house sounding like safety and yet beneath the clink and chatter carrying, the hush of a truth waiting by the door with its shoes still on. "If you were in Margaret's place tonight, would you speak up or wait drop your take in the comments?" Plates drifted toward the sink, and the evening settled into that gentle after-dinner hush, the kind where a house seems to breathe on its own. Margaret rinsed a dish and noticed the tissue Olivia had used an orange crescent pressed into the paper like the aftertaste of something bitter, then the scissored corner of a foil wrapper by the bin, only 3 letters left, pre, not proof but enough to tug at a thread. Olivia stood at the counter with her palms laid flat, as if measuring steadiness, color a shade lighter in her cheeks. And Ethan tried to make steadiness easier by turning the dishwasher into a game, points for plates and bonus points for anything that actually fit on the top rack, kindness disguised as silliness. The doorbell chimed and Mrs. Carter stepped in with a casserole dish and a breezy stream of neighborhood weather, the kind of chatter that floats past the real story. And somewhere in the float was the word clinic, a harmless note about appointment reminders that sometimes ping on Sundays, Olivia smiling with careful grace, thanking her, letting Ethan carry the small talk while she rested her wrists on the cool counter edge. When the door closed, the house felt smaller in a good way, like a room that wants people to hear one another, and Margaret poured fresh water because ordinary motions steady the air, then watched Olivia lean for a breath and right herself, not a collapse, not even a stumble, just the human moment of someone holding more than she wants to name. Ethan's hand found Olivia's elbow, no questions, just the quiet sentence of "I'm here," and the dishwasher hummed, lights softening to a patient tone. And Margaret wiped a ring of condensation from the table until it dried into a pale halo, thinking of 2 identical glasses and how time can be nudged by less than the weight of a lemon seed. Later, with lamps low and a piano line moving through the living room like a steadying tide, Olivia tucked her feet under the throw and held it in both hands. Ethan cued the next song, and Margaret opened the book she didn't read, listening to the room settle around them like a quilt stitched from familiar seasons. until Olivia excused herself with a hand to her temple. No performance. No search for eyes moving down the hallway in the posture of someone hoping to reach a door before a secret gathers noise. And Ethan hovered, then let her go because sometimes love is the discipline of not following. When he turned back, his glance skimmed the coaster where Margaret's glass still waited and found her face instead. And she returned it with a calm that wasn't quite peace but was close, the kind of calm that chooses not to break what morning might yet mend. At the bin, her fingertips brushed the torn foil smooth one side, ridged the other evidence that meant something and also meant patience. And she let it fall, closed the lid, switched off the kitchen light, and stood in the doorway long enough to notice two things at once: the glass she hadn't lifted and the soft click of a bedroom door further down the hall, both small sounds that felt like promises. She breathed in the complicated mercy of the moment and stepped into the dim, carrying forward a decision to wait without surrendering her watchfulness. The house holding its quiet like a secret that would arrive when it was ready. If this story pulled you in, will you subscribe? Morning thinned the night out of the house, and Margaret woke to the quiet order of a day pretending nothing had happened. Steam lifted from the kettle, sunlight found the lemon seeds she'd missed on the counter, and Olivia moved through the kitchen with careful economy mug, tea bag, breath like someone making sure each step lands exactly where it should, while Ethan scrolled at the table and joked about a weekend hike as if the word oxygen could fix any secret. Margaret offered toast, took none, watched Olivia's smile appear and dim like a pilot light, and noticed the faint press of Olivia's fingers at her own wrist, counting something private. The bathroom door clicked and Ethan went to shower, leaving two women with a clock that ticked too politely, so Margaret tried, "You slept?" And Olivia answered, "Enough," a sentence without furniture, lifting her mug so the steam stitched a quick curtain between them. The mail slot clapped, and in the handful of envelopes Margaret found a soft blue clinic flyer. Harmless wellness reminders that look like they belong in every kitchen drawer. So she slid it beside the takeout menus and told herself not to build a mountain out of paper. When Ethan left for work and Olivia said she'd run an errand, Margaret walked to Brooks' Pharmacy under a sky debating between gray and bright, pushed through the bell-top door, and drifted down the tea aisle as if peppermint were the whole point, while Mr. Brooks counseled a masked customer in a kind, practical tone on how to make those vitamins easier to swallow. Citrus helps, or a flavor packet, just check the ingredients. And Margaret, comparing chamomile to nothing, learned everything and not quite enough. She came home with tea she didn't want and a head full of almost answers. And by noon the house held its breath for a delivery. Olivia signed for a small parcel and carried it to the bedroom without ceremony. Brisk but not hiding, and Margaret stood at the threshold of asking and chose the older, lonelier choice, which was to wait. Afternoon arranged itself into small tasks, towels folded smooth, a grocery list partly true, a text from Ethan with a heart, and a meeting time. And the open window let in the neighborhood, a dog arguing with a siren, the soft chain hum of a bike, Mrs. Carter's rake scraping the walk, ordinary sounds insisting the world stayed regular. When Olivia returned to the kitchen, she looked less pale and more definite, like someone who decided to walk through a door instead of hovering near it, and she rolled an orange in her palm until its skin warmed, then asked, "Do you want half?" And Margaret said yes, because sometimes yes is the only bridge within reach. They ate in companionable quiet, peel piling like bright ribbon between them, and Margaret felt her shoulders let go, admitting that there are worse things than waiting like breaking something you can't remake. Later, a text lit Olivia's screen long enough for Margaret to catch the outline today, 5:30. Dr. Harris plain words and soft shoes, and a minute after that Ethan pinged the family thread about takeout, stepping on a wire he couldn't see. Dinner came in paper boxes, and everyone was gentle with their forks. And when Ethan took a call and the kitchen fell back into that delicate hush, Olivia rinsed her bowl and said, "Not to the sink and not to the air. I don't like lemons much." Actually, a sentence too small to mean anything until it did. Margaret looked at the fruit bowl, then at the ghost ring on the table where a glass had sat last night, and understood only that understanding wasn't finished with them. Evening slipped forward without picking sides. The lamp turned the room to honey. The street softened under the first edge of dusk, and Margaret carried an unopened book to the sofa, listening for footsteps and promises and the smallest change in a breath, while down the hall a door eased shut with the careful care of someone who doesn't want sound to be a witness. And still there was no collapse, no scene, only the slow untying of a knot she realized she had tied with her own fear. Late light braided itself through the blinds as the day tilted toward evening, and the house felt like a stage holding its breath for a cue no one wanted to give. Margaret set 2 mugs on the counter, then decided against brewing anything at all, because hospitality can sound like pressure when people are already carrying too much. Olivia came down the hall in a soft sweater and flats, hair caught back the way you do when you want the world out of your face, and she checked the time without seeming to. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, almost conversational, and the almost was the part that mattered. Ethan jingled his keys, offered to drive, and Olivia nodded, relief and reluctance sharing the same breath. Margaret stood with her hand on the doorframe as they left, told herself to stay, and found her feet disobeying in the smallest possible way. She stepped onto the porch, watched the car back out, and only then realized she had kept Olivia's scarf in her hand, a habit born of winters and worry. She took the bus 2 stops and walked the rest, telling herself she would simply hand over the scarf and go home. The clinic's glass door gave a tired sigh when she opened it. Inside, the waiting room was a chorus of small kindnesses lamps instead of ceiling panels, a bowl of mints, chairs that did not punish the spine. A receptionist with a careful smile pointed her to the seating area when she said she was just dropping something off. Margaret nodded and sat anyway, the scarf folded like a question in her lap. Across the room, Ethan bent over a clipboard with insurance forms, and Olivia pressed her name onto a signature line, the pen leaving a groove deeper than ink. When Olivia glanced up and saw Margaret, surprise flickered and didn't harden. She just touched her collarbone and then the scarf, as if to say thank you without words. A nurse called Olivia's name and she stood, steadied herself with a palm on the chair, and disappeared down a corridor that smelt faintly of disinfectant and oranges. Ethan sat beside his mother and exhaled a confession he hadn't planned. "I don't know how to help without making it worse." Margaret wanted to tell him that. Help and harm sometimes share an outline until the light changes. But she only said, "We won't push." Time loosened its tidy knots. A television whispered closed captions about weather. A toddler thumped a plastic truck against the leg of a coffee table. On the wall, a bulletin board arranged its own quiet argument for gentleness. Prenatal yoga printed next to grief support. Nutrition classes beside a flyer with a watercolor peach that read first trimester tips. Margaret looked away before the words could arrange themselves into certainty. After 20 minutes, the door sighed again and Dr. Harris appeared. The kind of calm some people are born with and others practice until it looks natural. He greeted Ethan first, then Margaret with a nod that neither invited nor denied familiarity, and said, "She asked me to keep this simple. She's okay. She be out in a few minutes." The doctor's tone was professional, but it carried a warmth that didn't feel scripted. "Sometimes," he added, "the body asks for quiet while it makes room." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Margaret felt the floor stop wobbling under her shoes and then start again, as if steadiness were a boat, not a dock. Olivia came back flushed and composed, a small paper cup of water in her hand. "The way people emerge from rooms where the air has been measured?" Ethan stood too quickly and she laughed, which was mercy. Then she sat and took another sip, as if teaching her lungs to trust the room. "I'm fine," she said, and this time the sentence had furniture in it. On the drive home, rain threaded the windshield in tidy lines, the kind that make a city softer. Margaret watched streetlights write themselves into the wet pavement and thought about secrets that are really shields, and suspicions that are really shadows thrown by fear. Back at the house, Olivia slipped upstairs while Ethan carried in leftovers and paper napkins like they were a plan. Margaret followed to the threshold of the bedroom and stopped when she saw the parcel from earlier open on the dresser inside. Not drama, just ordinary care, a small bottle with a label that promised gentler mornings, a neat card of instructions printed in fonts that tried hard to be kind. Olivia turned, caught Margaret's gaze, and didn't flinch. "I needed time," she said, the words simple enough to hold. I didn't want to say it before I knew what I was saying. Margaret nodded and let the scarf go, laying it over the back of a chair like a flag set down after a long vigil. In the kitchen, Ethan clattered a drawer and called out something about forks. The house remembered it was a home. Margaret went downstairs, set 3 plates without announcing it. And when Olivia joined them, she moved with the steadiness of someone who had chosen a door and walked through. They ate without performing cheer. The rain gentled the windows. Between bites, Ethan told a story about a client who thought deadlines were gravity, and Olivia smiled for real. And Margaret felt her own chest loosen around the simple miracle of people sitting together and not breaking. Later, when the dishes were done and the lamps were low, Olivia paused in the doorway as if remembering something left unsaid, then looked at Margaret with a question that wasn't really a question. You switched them, didn't you? The room held the truth without blinking. Margaret could have lied to save face or told the whole story to save pride, but she only nodded one small yes that meant I was afraid. I chose caution. I'm ready to choose differently. Olivia's shoulders softened. Okay, she said, and it was permission, not surrender. The night settled, and for the first time in days the silence felt like a place to rest instead of a place to hide. Rain rinsed the streets clean and the house woke up softer. Margaret found Olivia at the table with a small amber bottle standing beside her notebook like a quiet witness. Ethan shuffling in with sleep-stiff hair and a gentleness that made every sound smaller, and Olivia, without ceremony, turned the label outward and said, "It's for the nausea, and for the way the room tilts before it decides to be still, a plainness that did more good than comfort ever does." They ate simply, oats and pear, avoiding strong smells, and when Olivia swallowed the vitamin, that quick blink that used to frighten Margaret became proof of a bitter thing doing its work, Ethan reading the brand under his breath, Prague's, closing the loop on the torn foil edge. Margaret had once treated like a siren. The morning folded into chores and, almost on purpose, Margaret made a small museum on the counter, the crumpled tissue with its faint orange thread, the empty foil, the coaster's ghost ring, and Olivia stood beside her and said she'd tried to fly under the radar, only to discover the radar lived here, while Margaret admitted she'd learned to point suspicion long before Olivia arrived and was still relearning where not to aim. They wrote house rules as nets, not laws, no secret fixes, labels on homemade drinks, a fridge note for appointments with no commentary attached, and Ethan drew a lemon with a neat strike through it like a tiny treaty, which made Olivia groan laugh and, to her surprise, made Margaret laugh too, the sound like a door opening that had stuck for years. Mrs. Carter popped in with ginger candies for tummies that negotiate, then floated off, and at the counter Olivia unwrapped one and claimed the smallest victory, then, eyes steady, voice low, said she'd had an early loss once before Ethan. That silence had filled the walls, and she thought secrecy might keep them from echoing this time. And Margaret, hands on the cool edge the way Olivia's had been the night before, didn't reach for a fix, only said thank you, because sometimes the only decent offering is space that doesn't echo. Near dusk, Margaret brewed ginger tea and labeled the handles with sticky notes, O&M, practicing in miniature what they'd promised in full. And when she set the mugs down, Olivia rested a palm over her middle, not a declaration, just an acknowledgement that one body can hold more than one truth, then met Margaret's eyes as Margaret said, "I switched them because I didn't trust you," and Olivia answered, "I hid it because I was scared," and they let both sentences stand like two chairs finally pulled out for the same table. The house exhaling as the little bottle on the sideboard caught a line of lamplight and held it like a pocket-sized sunrise. No crash, no scene. Just 3 people moving around each other with care instead of caution while the evening learned how to be gentle again. Sunday slid in on quiet feet, the house still carrying last night's gentleness as Margaret tied an apron and set out bowls while Olivia measured her morning carefully vitamin, ginger candy, a slow breath that didn't apologize, and Ethan moved through the kitchen with the easy attention of someone learning a new rhythm. The fridge note with their small treatise labels, mentions, appointment times held its place beside Ethan's doodled lemon with a line like a private flag, and when the phone chimed with an unknown number, Margaret almost reached first, then let it ring into speaker at Olivia's nod. Dr. Harris's nurse. Steady and bright, said the labs looked good. Hydration and rest would do their patient more favors than heroics, and that the bitter aftertaste could be softened with anything gentle ginger, a little honey, not citrus if it argued, which absurdly made all three of them smile at the same time. Later, at the market, Margaret steered their cart past the lemon pyramid out of habit and into the aisle of calm things plain crackers, pears that would ripen when they were told, and when Mrs. Carter appeared between displays with a cloud of neighbor news, Margaret surprised herself by stepping forward as a shield made of ordinary words. "We're well, thanks, not defensive, just finished." And the conversation stayed on flowers and the pothole on Beach Street. Back home, a low drizzle stitched the windows and Olivia folded herself onto the couch with a blanket. And the kind of tired that isn't defeat but the bill for a brave week. Ethan kneeling to plug in the humidifier like a man building weather to order, and Margaret brews 2 mugs, labels them without ceremony, then carries one to Olivia and one to herself, and after a breath, says she used to hate asking for help because it made the room feel smaller, and Olivia eyes glassy. Not breaking says she learned to hide good news as if it were fragile because once it was, and Ethan, chin on the sofa cushion, confesses he tried to hold both of them up by pretending nothing weighed anything, which is just another way to drop everything at once. The day unfolds without event and still manages a turn, a soft knock, a parcel from the clinic, just a booklet, and a small, kinder-tasting supplement sample that Olivia opens and sets on the table like a truce offered from a distance. And Margaret, reading the bold print about rest and the small print about listening to your body, realizes the loudest thing in the house is no longer her own fear, but the steady drum of 3 people keeping time together. That night, when she switches off the kitchen light, the glass door throws their reflections into one pane Ethan's arm across the back of the sofa, Olivia's hand resting where a secret is becoming an announcement, Margaret's shoulders lowered to a height that doesn't crowd, and for the first time the dark feels not like a curtain closing, but like a room willing to hold them while they breathe. By midweek, the house had learned its calmer gait, and with it came a day that asked for bolder honesty. Ethan came home early with a bunch of supermarket tulips that hadn't decided on their color yet. Olivia tucked the clinic booklet into her bag like a passport, and Margaret, who had promised herself not to crowd, waited by the window and watched rain gather in the seam of the sill until she knew waiting was a kind of love she finally understood. At the appointment, she stayed in the lobby with a magazine she did not read, counting the soft rise and fall of a toddler's nap across the room the way she used to count worries. And when the door opened, Olivia walked out with the careful smile of someone carrying glass that has survived the "kill no" announcement. Just eyes bright enough to say something had gone right, and Ethan, reckless with relief, kissed her forehead as if the world were briefly as simple as choosing where to put your joy. On the ride home, Olivia told him the part she had kept from him about the earlier loss and the echo it left in ordinary rooms, and Ethan, hands steady on the wheel, said he wished he'd known. Then corrected himself. No, he was glad he knew now, because now was when the knowing could help, and Margaret, in the back seat, looked at the traffic lights spilling color onto wet asphalt and realized that the glass she had swapped had never been the real container for her fear, that she had been bracing against a story she'd written before Olivia ever moved in. Back in the kitchen, she opened the cabinet and set 2 new tumblers side by side, slipped a small label under each M and O, no sermon, only clarity, and poured water over a slice of pear instead of lemon, sliding Olivia's glass across the counter like a promise. Then, because mending sometimes needs a gesture you can taste, she lifted her own and drank first, no hesitation, letting the ordinary sweetness settle. They ate a simple dinner, and afterward Margaret brought out a small velvet box she hadn't meant to keep forever, a thin gold charm from her mother that had crossed oceans and arguments to arrive here, and she pressed it into Olivia's palm with a sentence that was almost weightless, for safekeeping, not for luck, and Olivia's fingers closed around it as if closing a door gently, the kind that shuts without noise. Later, while Ethan rinsed plates, Olivia leaned against the doorway and said she wanted to tell Mrs. Carter herself, so the right story traveled, faster than the wrong one. And Margaret, for once, didn't rush to manage. She just nodded and said she'd be there if needed, which was new and better than help, Then she wiped the old water ring from the table until the wood was only wood again. And when the three of them settled into the living room, the little bottle on the sideboard caught a run of lamplight and threw it back like a quiet signal. Not a finish line, but a steadier lane. The storm found its last quiet inside the small things. A Saturday sun that behaved. A table set without negotiation. The bell of the door when Mrs. Carter stepped in with a pie and 1,000 friendly rumors trailing her like ribbons. And Margaret steady now, meeting each thread with the right scissors, not sharp, just exact. Olivia poured water over slices of pear and wrote "O" on her glass as easily as signing her name. And Margaret, in a gesture that felt like a bridge built from ordinary wood, poured her own and drank first, the sweetness simple and deliberate. When the neighbor's eyes slid to the little amber bottle on the sideboard, Margaret named it before the whisper could. Prenatal bitter, but kinder on an empty stomach with ginger, a sentence that left no room for suspense and all the room for care, and Olivia's shoulders softened at the mercy of someone else carrying the explanation. Later, Ethan coaxed the pie into plates and told a thin joke about deadlines. The room laughing not because it was hilarious, but because everyone needed to practice lightness again, and Mrs. Carter, whose curiosity often arrived before her apology, surprised them by pressing a small knitted cap into Olivia's hands, just in case, and if not now, then someday, and Olivia held it the way you hold a future that promises nothing and still asks to be treated as real. When the dishes were stacked and the house exhaled, Margaret took Olivia onto the porch where the afternoon lay warm and honest, and she said the words that had been waiting for daylight, that fear had worn conviction's coat, that she'd made a switch in the name of love and learned it was trust that needed trading, not glasses. Olivia listened, the charm bracelet on her wrist a thin gold circle from Margaret's mother-catching sun in small, forgiving flashes, and she answered not with a speech, but with a hand laid over Margaret's, light and decisive. Inside, Ethan tuned the radio to a station that keeps faith with old songs, and the melody drifted through the screen door as if the house itself were remembering how to hold a tune. By evening, the fridge note looked less like rules and more like good manners. The lemon with a line doodle half faded from fingers touching it in passing, and the water ring on the table had been rubbed away so completely that Margaret had to work to recall where it used to be. When night drew the windows dark, Olivia set the amber bottle beside a glass labeled with tomorrow's time. Ethan slid the clinic booklet into a drawer that now contained takeout menus and nothing ominous, and Margaret switched off the kitchen light and saw their reflections settle into one pain-free steady silhouettes in a room that had chosen not to keep any more secrets than it needed to. Then she let the dark come in, not as a curtain but as a roof, and the house held them.